We are here today during National Crime Victims' Rights Week to continue a community-wide conversation about public safety in the district. We know that over the past year, our city has experienced an overall decrease in crime, but sadly, we have also experienced a spike in homicides. The number of shootings in D.C. has stayed frustratingly steady over the last several years, and unfortunately, over time, those shootings have become more deadly. As I continue to say, our answer to this type of violent crime must involve both policing and healing. In the budget I sent to the council, we invest in both. This budget includes investments to continue building our police force to up to 4,000 officers by 2021. And as Chief Newsham has said before, and it's a point I want to reiterate, having more officers does not necessarily mean we are arresting more people. In fact, MPD officers arrests continue to trend. In fact, arrests by MPD trend downward. But by having more officers on our force, we are better able to use other tools such as education and community partnerships to find solutions to reducing crime. Again, though ending cycles of violence is about more than just policing, we must address the trauma that is caused when people in our community become victims of crimes, or when their friends or family members, neighbors, or classmates become victims of crime. Director Muriel Garcia, who will speak in just a moment, will speak about the effects of trauma in our community. Here's what we know. Pervasive trauma, current trauma, and past trauma requires a response that is trauma-informed, community-based, and coordinated across the district's agencies and community providers. So in this budget, we're investing $3 million to bolster the efforts of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, and $1.6 million in our Office of Victim Services and Justice grants. The investments in the one's office, and Director McFadden is here with me and available for questions as well, will support the addition of more violence interrupters in our community. The $1.6 million investment at Victim Services and Justice grants will allow us to identify sites in 3 neighborhoods with high rates of violence that have also historically been underserved or experienced barriers to accessing services. We'll then build individual and community capacity around responding to violence and trauma in an effective manner. And I'm going to ask Michelle to talk a little bit more about that. In addition to creating these new sites, we're also investing $1.6 million to establish connected schools that will act as neighborhood hubs that provide wraparound services for students and families. This budget also includes $4.7 million for our new Families First DC initiative to establish 10 family support centers in neighborhoods east of the river to hear from families directly about what they need and how to empower those families with resources, support, and opportunities. So given the root causes of violence, we also know that there are no lines that separate these investments. Investments in housing are investments in public safety. Investments in education are investments in public safety. Likewise, health investments in healthcare are investments in public safety. There really isn't a part of this upcoming budget that isn't about building stronger communities and safer, stronger neighborhoods. So with that, I want to turn to the Assistant Chief of Police, Robert Conti, who will give a public safety briefing from the police perspective, and then we will hear from Director Garcia and take your questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. Anytime a member of our community is gunned down, we're all responsible for bringing the person or persons responsible to justice. Over the last 5 days, there have been 4 homicides in the district. On Thursday, April 4th, 2019, at approximately 8:15 p.m., members of the 6th District responded to the report of the sounds of gunshots in the 4900 block of Nash Street Northeast. When officers got to the scene, they found 2 adult males unresponsive inside the stairwell of a residential building, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. The victims, identified as 23-year-old Joe McDowney of Southeast DC and 21-year-old Desmond Richardson of Temple Hills, Maryland, were pronounced on the scene. An additional adult male victim was located a short distance away in the 900 block of 44th Street Northeast, suffering from a gunshot wound. The victim was transported to an area hospital for treatment of non-life-threatening injuries. Officers did recover a firearm on scene, and we continue to ask the public for their assistance by providing information relevant to this case as it remains under investigation. Also on Friday, April 5th, 2019, at approximately 12:28 a.m., members of the 7th District responded to the report of an assault in progress in the 2900 block of Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue Southeast. Upon arrival, officers located an adult male victim suffering from an apparent stab wound. The victim, identified as 49-year-old Edwin Richardson of Southeast DC, was transported to an area hospital where he was pronounced. This case also remains under investigation by our homicide branch. Additionally, on Sunday, April 7th, at approximately 1:35 a.m., members of the 7th District responded to the report of a shooting in the 2400 block of Wagner Street Southeast. When officers got to the scene, they located an adult male victim in an apartment building suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. The victim, identified as 28-year-old Montre Brown of Southeast DC, was pronounced on scene. And this case remains an active MPD investigation, so please reach out to our tip line if you have any information concerning this incident. Time after time, we see the use of illegal guns tear residents, neighborhoods, and families apart. These acts of violence are unacceptable in our city. This is why getting illegal firearms off the street remains the #1 priority of the Bowser administration, and the men and women of the Metropolitan Police Department are committed to their removal. We're also committed to working with our partners at the Office of Victim Service and Justice Grants to provide services to the communities affected by gun violence. The victims of these shootings aren't the only ones affected. Their loved ones, family and friends, community members, all experience trauma from these events. Our detectives are working around the clock to bring closure to these and all other homicide cases that are unsolved in the district. If you have information on a case, please give us a call at 202-727-9099 or text tip us anonymously at 50411. Rewards of up to $25,000 in homicide cases and $10,000 in shooting and armed robbery cases are offered. Thank you, and I would like to also bring up Director Garcia at this time.
Good morning. We know when violent incidents occur, families are left hurting, neighborhoods are left hurting, and we want to do everything we can to help them heal. Building on the work that our office has already done around enhancing the district's capacity to respond to trauma, the mayor's invested $1.6 million to create 3 sites in Wards 7 and 8 in communities that have had historical high levels of not only violence, but individual, community, generational, and historical trauma, where we can provide trauma-specific clinical interventions, work with community leaders to train members in the community around trauma-informed response, and create peer navigators to help connect individuals and families with a host of services that the district and our community-based organizations already provide. We know that hurt people, and when we address those underlying hurts and help people heal, we know that we can create a safer, stronger DC. Thank you.
We are also joined by Deputy Mayor Kevin Donahue, and we are available for press questions. Yes, sir. Sam.
Chief Conte, you talked about the shooting. That was Thursday night, right, when these 2 people were killed in a house? Is that
an apartment?
About?
It was in an apartment building.
But that was Thursday night?
Yes, sir.
There was an incident on Sheriff Road.
Yes.
You said 44 Street Northeast. Is that the same thing?
Yes, there was a vehicle that crashed, and there was a gun that was recovered over there at that scene, and there was an individual inside of that vehicle who was suffering from a gunshot wound, and we believe that those incidents are connected.
So that's the 44th Street you're talking about?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Yes.
Unrelated question. Mayor, can you explain what happened with the AmeriCorps grant funding that several outlets have reported on that was lost, whether that was human or technical error? If it was human error, who was responsible for it?
I think that it could be a combination of both. And we've had some personnel actions in our Serve DC department in the district related to the human and technical errors. And we're examining now how we can bolster our systems to make sure that nothing like that can happen again.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, then it was not merely a technical error, there was also human error involved?
I don't know every detail about it, but I have to say that if any technical error should have been raised so that we could deal with it appropriately before the deadline expired.
Who was responsible for what happened and what happened?
We've had two personnel actions at Serve DC, and that's really the most I can say about a personnel action.
People fired, is that what you meant?
We've had two people who were with the government who are no longer with the government.
Have you had any indication from the federal government that there still might be a chance to obtain this funding?
Our focus, Peter, is making sure that those organizations that do very good work will not be harmed in this process while we continue to work on any relief we can find.
Will they receive money from the DC budget?
If it is necessary to keep them whole. Yes.
Can I ask about the two of the cases from the assistant chief?
Sure.
One, the Wagner Street shooting in the laundry room. What can you tell us about that as far as what you know about the circumstances and any suspects in that case?
The circumstances are we received a call to respond to the location for a person in the laundry room who was unconscious. Our members responded to that location, and upon examination of the scene, there was a determination that the victim in this case had been shot. There were no initial calls to the police about a shooting at the location, and the case is under investigation. And again, we're asking for the public's help. Anyone who has information they'd like to relay to us to call us 727-9099 or anonymous tip 50411.
And then on Saturday, there was human remains or a dead body found in woods in Southeast. What can you tell us about the state of decomposition, how long it appears the body was there, what you know in that investigation?
The body that was on 30th Street, there were skeletal remains. It was at advanced stages of decomposition, just pretty much skeletal remains. At this point, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner takes over the investigation to determine a manner and cause of death, and they'll work very closely with the Metropolitan Police Department.
So is that a homicide investigation as of yet, or?
No, it's not. The manner and cause of death will be determined by the medical examiner's office, and then at that point, again, we'll just work together forward, and we're doing some preliminary things to try to identify who the person is. Obviously, we have to go through some DNA issues, et cetera, but we'll work very closely with the medical examiner on that.
So that day at the scene, U.S. Marshals arrived. Can you tell us why U.S. Marshals were interested in this case?
Just part of the investigation. There were some things that were recovered from the scene and part of the investigation. We're all working on this case together.
Sam.
Mayor, I want to ask you a question for another reporter who's working on the story. But this reporter went to the Pedalpalooza over the weekend.
With about 100,000 people, I'm told.
Well, yes, she said that she went to do the story, but she couldn't get there so her story became out. She couldn't get to the story because there was so much traffic. Any ideas on how to deal with something like that?
Well, we, as I told my team earlier, we were blessed by the cherry blossom gods this cherry blossom season, and we just had perfect weather. The peak bloom, I think, came a little bit earlier, but still many people were able to enjoy, and I still think that people are enjoying the blossoms. And we're going into, I think, the second season with the wharf being open and the wharf fully programming activities, including fireworks and booths. So it's a lot of ways for families to get out and enjoy the weather and enjoy the city. We, of course, encourage people not to drive because with any cherry blossom season, we have many more people in that area. And we want people to be able to enjoy all that the waterfront offers and not sit in traffic. I was there on Saturday morning. I wasn't there for the fireworks, so I was there on Saturday morning, and a couple of observations. We invested a couple of years ago in connecting L'Enfant Plaza to the wharf by way of a set of stairs. And people are coming from the mall, from the metro stations, and coming down those stairs to access the wharf, and likewise they can access the tidal basin. So we encourage people to think about stopping before you get to the wharf, using those stairs as well. The wharf also invests in a shuttle that I think connects from Waterfront Plaza, and we want to encourage people to come from the southwest side and before you get to the wharf. And we will continue thinking about ways that we activate pedestrian-friendly activities in and around the wharf. So a lot of people, long answer to a short question, that a lot of people enjoyed the cherry blossoms and continue to do so, which is a rich part of the DC experience. The wharf activated a lot of activities which were also well received, that were good, free, fun for people of all ages, and so that's a good thing. Last thing is we continue to encourage people not to drive all the way into the tidal basin area or the wharf. Use the free shuttle, the free circulator, walk from L'Enfant Plaza, and use the metro. Yes, sir.
Mayor, the DC Auditor and DC Policy Center both raised concerns in recent weeks about the current budget, saying that it's growing at a rate that the economic fundamentals in the district can't sustain. What are your latest thoughts on that?
We are very proud of the budget that we advanced, Peter. We produced a budget following a series of budget engagement forums, discussions with our directors, discussions with members of the council, who I might add advanced $1.6 billion in spending requests for this budget. We have increased our investment in affordable housing, which is the #1 concern of DC residents from all income spectrums. And I approach every budget with how can we invest our dollars to make the city be able to absorb our growth, invest in the infrastructure that is going to allow us to continue to grow and keep and attract DC residents and businesses. And I think this budget does all of those things. Yes, sir.
Mayor, after your re-election, I think you stood right here in this room and told us that you plan to move forward with sales of recreational marijuana.
Yes.
Your quote was early 2019. It's April. I don't know that it's necessarily early 2019 anymore, and we haven't heard anything. What's the holdup with your plan to submit something for sales of recreational marijuana?
Well, we want to get it right, Mark, and we want to make sure that we consider life, safe, and health issues as well as business concerns, and we continue to work on it.
So can you tell us what the concerns are? I mean, that sounds a little vague. It sounded like when you made the announcement, like you had something in mind, you were ready, you were expecting to roll it out, and now, 4 months later, you don't seem as certain that you're able to have something together.
Well, when we are able to talk to you about some specifics, we'll get together here again. Yes, Sam.
Mr. McFadden, I'd like to ask him about it's called the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement.
Yes.
First up, how do you all react to homicides? Are you on homicide scenes, and what are you doing to try to interrupt this violence and this out?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so we have a 9 o'clock call every morning to look at what took place the following night in the city. And so what happens when there is an incident or a homicide or a failed attempt within our priority communities. We cover 21 priority communities, and we looked at homicides, shootings, incidents, and where our contractors had relationships. So these are the communities that we selected. And so when a situation takes place, they go on scene. We have an alert system that goes out immediately, myself, chief of staff, or one of my staff in the office will call to make sure that they have the alert. They will report on scene. While they're on scene, they're feeding information back to what's going on, if they need any further support from the one's office, what's taking place. The goal there is to mitigate that situation, if possible, depending on what just took place. And so the goal is to work with the victim. We have relationships with the triage centers and the hospitals. We can get into the hospitals. We also have relationships in DC jail. We can get in there as well. And so the goal is to mitigate that situation, if possible, considering on the hierarchy of the individual who was shot and the situation. And so within 24 hours, they submit what we call a plan to us on their next actions. They have a triage meeting, and they talk about what happened, precipitating factors, who may be involved, and what it is we need to do to continue to support public safety.
How many people do you have on the streets that are
on the streets? We have about 20 interrupters, but we also have case managers as well, because you can't do this work unless you connect the individual to the needed resources and supports and services that they need to take care of their home and their housing situation. And so we have 20. With the budget enhancement moving forward, we'll be able to provide 7 to 8 new full-time interrupters in the communities that we're presently working in.
Can I ask Mr. Donahue a question? How does this compare with the efforts that New York has underway? I mean, I think that's one of the kind of the models for this type of thing.
I'm glad you asked that question. So we actually sent a team composed of Director Garcia and members of the One's office to New York City to try to understand beyond the rhetoric, operationally, what does it look like? And New York has place-based models that basically combine the programs that you heard about today from both Director McFadden and Garcia. So they have interrupters that have a home base, typically in a neighborhood, with a nonprofit that has credibility in that neighborhood. And in addition to the interrupters, they have therapists who are on scene, who then can provide some counseling services to individuals and connect them to deeper services. So New York has started with 5 sites. It's a much larger city. They now have, I think, well more than 20 sites, evolving it each year, but effectively it combines the interrupters with a nonprofit in a community and services that are on site that people do not have to go outside of that neighborhood to get. And I think with the mayor's budget submission, we're trying to adapt that model to what we have here and what we see here in DC as its needs.
Right, thank you.